This Sunday, the Trump doctrine.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip.
President Trump stuns the world with his proposal to take over Gaza.
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East.
After expressing plans to take control of Greenland, the Panama Canal, and Canada, what is America's new foreign policy vision? I'll talk to National Security Adviser Mike Waltz. Plus, Musk's mission.
Elon Musk is seizing power from the American people.
He's done a great job. Look at all the fraud that he's found.
Elon Musk's sweeping agenda to reshape the federal government is raising alarms and testing the limits of the law. I'll speak with Democratic Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey. And a way with words. Our Meet the Moment conversation with poet Amanda Gorman.
And why do you think poetry is so critical to who we are as a nation?
We are trying as a people to speak to our best shared common humanity. Typically, poetry is the rhetoric that encapsulates that the best.
Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News Chief Washington Correspondent Andrea Mitchell, NBC News Senior White House Correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, Simone Sanders Townsend, former chief spokeswoman for Vice President Kamala Harris, and Republican strategist Sarah Fagan. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Good Sunday morning. We begin with President Trump's historic overhaul of the federal government that is proceeding at an unprecedented pace and scale. The president has tasked Elon Musk, the world's richest man, with carrying out his mission. And now Musk and his team of young tech engineers have inserted themselves into at least 17 federal agencies, according to the New York Times, accessing sensitive federal data like Social Security numbers and bank accounts for millions of Americans. On Friday, President Trump defended Musk's role.
Is there anything you've told Elon Musk he cannot touch?
Well, we haven't discussed that much. I'll tell him to go here, go there. He does it. He's got a very capable group of people. Very capable. They know what they're doing.
Now, President Trump says he has directed Musk to turn his sights toward the Pentagon. The Defense Department has billions of dollars in contracts with Musk through SpaceX and his other companies.
You think there's some areas where you wouldn't let him work because he has conflicts of interest?
If there was a no, I haven't seen that. And he would know not to do it. So we haven't had that yet. But if there was a conflict, we would let him work in that area.
The president's agenda is facing serious challenges in the courts, with more than 24 lawsuits to date. Federal judges temporarily blocking Musk's team from accessing those sensitive Treasury Department records, pausing the Trump administration's buyout offer for federal workers, and for now blocking a plan that would have put thousands of USAID workers on administrative leave. The agency largely focuses on disease prevention, disaster relief, and food programs in famine-stricken areas. First Lady Melania Trump praised the agency during her husband's first term.
We want to show the world that we care, and I partnered and I'm working with the USAID.
Also this week, President Trump stunned world leaders by floating an American takeover of Gaza.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too.
You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there? Redevelopment?
I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East. And everybody I've spoken to, this was not a decision made lightly. Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land.
President Trump's words prompting swift condemnation from Arab nations like Egypt and Jordan, and raising doubts even among some Republicans.
I'm not supportive of having the American people pay to rebuild Gaza. I don't think that's our responsibility.
probably needs some clarification on what exactly that means. He's a developer of resorts. I think he sees a good opportunity. But we need to, obviously, Gaza's not ours. It's sovereign. It's part of another country.
And joining me now is National Security Adviser Mike Waltz. Colonel Waltz, welcome to Meet the Press.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be with you.
It's great to have you. Let's start with President Trump's attempts to scale back USAID, essentially stepping back from countries that have long relied on American support. The former administrator of USAID under George W. Bush called it a huge mistake, adding, quote, "This assistance is one of the most powerful tools Washington has to push back against Chinese and Russian influence and to prevent transnational threats such as disease and terrorism from reaching U.S. soil." Is America basically handing China and Russia an opportunity to expand their influence on the world stage?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, Kristen, this is exactly what President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, Elon Musk, myself, and many others who have worked with USAID are talking about. All too often, these missions and these programs, number one, are not in line with strategic U.S. interests, like pushing back on China. They're doing all kinds of other things that, frankly, aren't in line with strategic interests or the president's vision, number one. Number two, often, all too often, only cents on the dollar actually makes it to people in need between the big contractors, the subcontractors, the local contractors. The dollars aren't being used wisely. We need to take a hard look at it. We need to move quickly. And that's exactly what's being done. And personally, I could tell you, I've worked out in the Middle East. We saw a radio station with a big Built by America USAID. We go inside, and there is literally a black turbaned mullah backed by Iran preaching anti-American hate. And yet the USAID officer in charge told me as a Green Beret, well, we're just building radio stations. We're just handing out food. That's our job, to just be humanitarian. No. We need to realign their mission and line it up with the president's foreign policy vision.
Well, let me ask it this way. I mean, the Trump administration effectively is trying to gut the entire agency. USAID has fought AIDS globally, worked to eradicate polio, served as the world's largest provider of famine relief. Why didn't the administration look at individual programs and take the time to figure out what your priorities are, what could be saved?
Well, it's perfectly reasonable to say, let's pause, and then let's let those key programs bubble up and come through. And that's exactly what we're doing through a waiver process. We have issued dozens and dozens of those waivers to let, for example, things like Ebola screeners and other programs get through. So Secretary Rubio, as the acting administrator, and I think that is perfectly appropriate for USAID to be kind of tucked into the State Department and better align with their mission, rather than just spreading money around, kind of peanut butter spreading all around the world. Let's line it with key objectives, key goals. And as those waivers go through, those payments are going through. So this is a pause. But I've got to tell you, the president is ready to move quickly. He's ready to move boldly. And that's what his team is doing.
But, I mean, Colonel, it's a pause because the court stopped it. The administration had slashed a staff of more than 10,000 down to about 600 people. How many people are currently working for USAID?
Look, the USAID, and you have seen hearing after hearing after hearing on this, and the current chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the past in the House completely support an overhaul of USAID. It has become incredibly bloated. It's become incredibly top-heavy, and it's essentially a series of contracts. If you think the big defense contractors have too much power and too much influence, wait until you dig into the USAID contractors and the subcontractors and the subcontractors and the local contractors. Case in point, I don't think the American people support $3 billion plus going over to the Taliban through a series of UN contractors that only allow the Taliban to then play winners and losers with who supports them and who gets punished with them on the ground. And we have documented evidence after documented evidence that that's the case. And yet we want just kind of, we don't want studies and commissions. The president wants action, and that's what he's getting.
You know, Colonel, you used to support parts of USAID's mission. As a member of Congress, you sponsored legislation for USAID to expand girls' access to education worldwide, which you said was, quote, essential to our national security. Is foreign aid vital to the nation's national security?
When foreign aid is aligned with U.S. objectives and U.S. objectives meet the president's objectives as commander-in-chief, then it is. But that is not the case. Many of these senior aid officials have their own agenda, have gone in their own direction. And these programs, many of which are no longer authorized by Congress, just seem to continue in perpetuity. So we could talk the entire time about USAID. I have a lot of experience about it on the ground. But in these first 2 weeks, we've had major foreign leaders. We have the Mexicans putting thousands of their troops on the border, the Canadians putting their assets on the border, Panama moving away from Belt and Road, Colombia first refusing to take deportation, and then now taking it. And we can go on and on with the successes of the hostages that the previous administration couldn't get out. President Trump says there's all hell to pay. And now we have not only hostages from Hamas reuniting from their family, from Venezuela and from the Taliban, too. So we've had an amazing 2 weeks. We could get into the details of foreign assistance, but it badly needs reform.
All right, let's move on to Elon Musk. President Trump says he's directing him to now find cuts in the Pentagon. It's worth noting the Defense Department has billions of dollars with contracts with Elon Musk's companies. Do you believe that is a conflict of interest for Elon Musk to be finding cuts at the Pentagon?
Elon is the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, and if there is any agency what I have a ton of experience with in the Department of Defense with an $800 billion plus budget, it's DOD. Everything there seems to cost too much, take too long, and deliver too little to the soldiers. I, as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, held up a bag of bolts that would cost $100 in a hardware store that cost $90,000 to the United States Air Force. And the American people have said enough. Enough with the bloat and the waste and the debt. And when we have $1 trillion of interest in our debt that's exceeded our entire defense budget, we do need great minds and we do need business leaders to go in there and absolutely reform the Pentagon's acquisition process.
But, Colonel, my question is Elon Musk the right person for that job, given his billions of dollars in contracts with the Defense Department? How can he cut an agency where he has billions of dollars at stake?
Well, look, with all of the appropriate firewalls will be in place. But I'll tell you, as someone who used to have Cape Canaveral in my district, the president created the Space Force. And in 2018, the Chinese launched more than us and the rest of the world combined. Now, in just this last year, SpaceX has launched more than the rest of the world combined, has transformed, along with the president's directive to transform space. But if you want to sit that aside, that's fine, because there is plenty to look into in shipbuilding, which is an absolute mess, to look into contracting, into procurement. And in many of these cases where you pay people right up front, and then they don't deliver for years and years and years, where maintenance and costs overrun, where facilities have literally feces and mold and cockroaches in them for our barracks and our soldiers. We need all the efficiency we can get in the Pentagon, and I think the American people and the soldiers will welcome it.
We have a fair amount more to get to. Let's go to Gaza now. President Trump suggesting the U.S. would take over Gaza. And then he walked back saying U.S. troops are not going to be on the ground. Let me ask you, Colonel, what is the White House's plan for who will control Gaza once the war is over? Well, right now, the IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces
have had to go in and will continue to destroy Hamas if they do not honor the terms of this ceasefire. So that's point one. Point two, President Trump looks at this in very practical terms in the sense of, are we going to repeat the definition of insanity here and pour billions in, rebuild, and just have another October 7th again and another war years from now? Let's look at the reality of having 1.8 million people sitting in piles of rubble with no sewage, with unexploded ordnance. And he's asking in a humane way, what is going to happen to these people? And everyone around the region says their heart breaks for the Palestinians, rightly so. But then come to the table with your plan if you don't like his plan. And interestingly, we are seeing all kinds of outreach since the president made that statement of saying, let's help you take this on. And so those conversations are ongoing right now.
Okay, so having conversations with other world leaders about potentially being a part of that post-construction effort once the world war is over. Let me ask you this: does the U.S.
But the key piece is you can't get to post-construction. You can't make this the Paris of the Mediterranean like Beirut was back in the 70s and give these people a better life if you've got 1.8 million people living in absolute squalor in mountains and mountains and mountains of debris. It's just President Trump is a builder. He's a deal maker in chief, and he understands that this is it just doesn't make sense. So for anyone, the media included, that doesn't like what he is proposing, come to us with a better plan.
Rapid fire final round, if I could. Let's talk about Canada. In a closed-door meeting with business leaders, outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned that President Trump is serious about annexing Canada to make it the 51st state. Is he right? Is President Trump serious about planning to annex Canada?
Look, I think the Canadian people many of them would love to join the United States with no tariffs, with lower taxes. And I have all kinds of neighbors down in Florida that are Canadians that are escaping many of the liberal policies and have moved in. But look, what we're talking about
yes or no? First of all, I think some Canadians would disagree with you.
In the Western Hemisphere?
I think some Canadians would disagree with you, but yes or no, is he planning to annex
part
Canada?
Of his policy. Well, I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is a lot of people that like what we have in the United States and do not like the last 10 years of liberal progressive governance in Trudeau. But really what you're seeing is a reassertion of American leadership in the Western Hemisphere from the Arctic all the way down to the Panama Canal. And that's what we're talking about, from Greenland to Arctic security, to the Panama Canal coming back under the United States. America has avoided our own hemisphere where we have the energy, the food, and the critical minerals for way too long. And you're seeing a reassertion of President Trump's leadership.
The New York Post is reporting that President Trump says that he spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Colonel, when did that phone call take place? Was it after the president was elected? And what was his message to Putin?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the president, and there are certainly a lot of sensitive conversations going on. We will have our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, our Vice President, our Special Envoy in Europe this week, talking through the details of how to end this war. And that means getting both sides of the table. What he has said is Russia's economy is not doing well. He is prepared to tax, to tariff, to sanction. We need to get all sides of the table and end this war. And it has come up in conversations with President Xi, with Prime Minister Modi, with leaders across the Middle East. Everybody is ready to help President Trump end this war. Let's get all sides of the table and negotiate.
Colonel, you've talked about every other world leader the White House has. Can you just say yes or no? Has he spoken to Putin, and are those sanctions coming potentially this week?
I'm not going to get into details, but the president's prepared to put all of those issues on the table this week, including the future of USAID to Ukraine. We need to recoup those costs. And that is going to be a partnership with the Ukrainians in terms of their rare earths, their natural resources, and their oil and gas, and also buying ours. Those conversations are going to happen this week. And I think an underlying principle here is that the Europeans have to own this conflict going forward. President Trump is going to end it. And then in terms of security guarantees, that is squarely going to be with the Europeans.
We're way out of time, but who do you like for the Super Bowl tonight, Colonel?
The Jacksonville Jaguars, but we had a really tough year.
All right, well, maybe next year. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, thank you so much for joining us. We covered a lot of ground, really appreciate it. And when we come back, Democratic Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey joins me next. Welcome back, and joining me now is Democratic Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey. Senator Kim, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to start with USAID. You just heard my conversation with Colonel Waltz about it. You actually started your career in public service at USAID. If you zoom out and look at the recent polling, it shows that 6 in 10 Americans actually support cuts to foreign aid. President Donald Trump says this is exactly what he campaigned on. How do you respond to that argument by President Trump, by Colonel Waltz, that this is what the American people voted for?
Well, when you look at the polling that's out there, the American people actually see diplomacy and development as critical to our foreign policy. Over 80% of Americans would agree that strong diplomacy and development is essential in pairing with our military. We have 3 pillars when it comes to our foreign policy. We have defense, diplomacy, and development. And each of those plays an integral role. And I hope the American people see that USAID, this is not charity. This is about our national security. And in fact, someone who said that exact line is Marco Rubio when he was a senator. There's a reason why USAID is at the Ronald Reagan building, is because Ronald Reagan was a strong supporter of this. What we're seeing right now with the Trump administration over the last week is just very clearly an American retreat when it comes to the rest of the world. Handing this over, like China doesn't even need to fight for their influence around the world now because of our own effort. We're doing China's work for them. And I hope that the American people understand just how dire a situation this is going to be, something that makes it more likely that we see conflicts, may have to use our own troops. And also, this is something that affects our ability to be able to access other markets, to grow our economy. So this has very tangible impacts, and this is going to be devastating to our nation's national security.
Let me ask you about some of the questions that have also been raised about this agency. According to the Inspector General of the agency, there have been significant shortcomings in transparency and vetting organizations that USAID works with, as well as limitations in obtaining data about agencies that partner with USAID. Should USAID have addressed some of these concerns sooner?
And these are the types of efforts that should be ongoing. I've worked in 4 different departments and agencies. I've seen challenges and concerns across the board, certainly more that we can do to make things efficient, make things more effective. But when you hear, National Security Advisor Waltz just now, he tries to use words like realignment, whereas what they're doing is dismantling. There is a more effective approach in going through USAID and trying to figure out, what are the types of actions that we support, what are ones that maybe we stop or we fix. But instead, what they did is just demonize. This wasn't about efficiency. The way that they demonized, the way that Musk talked about it as a criminal organization and basically said the public servants there are tantamount to that kind of criminal operation is just wrong and frankly insulting. And, for instance, Waltz talked about having a waiver for programs like PEPFAR. It's not true. I talked with people at USAID currently, and the payment system is shut down. There is no way to actually get food out there with PEPFAR, trying to support 20 million people on antiretroviral medication. I mean, we're talking about putting millions of lives at risk. And this is something where even if they say they will allow it to go forward, you don't have staff. You've cut the staff working in the continent of Africa down to about a dozen people. And that is something that is damaging. And one thing I'll just say on this front, just to hit it home for the American people, This is something where when we look at why it is that we want to engage in Africa, for instance, right now the continent of Africa is 1.5 billion people. That's going to go up to 2.5 billion in 25 years by the year 2050. That's half of the world's population growth in the continent of Africa over the next 25 years. I'm always a big fan of Wayne Gretzky saying, we skate to where the puck is going. This is about the workforce of the future, building that relationship. And China is now going around the world, saying that they're going to take over the programs that USAID has stopped. They're just, gleefully taking that leadership mantle, and we're giving it up.
It's interesting because some top Democrats are saying that now is a time to really be careful about choosing battles that you're going to engage in. David Axelrod this week said, quote, "My heart is with the people out on the street outside USAID, but my head tells me, man, Trump will be well satisfied to have this fight." Is he right, Senator?
No, he's not right, because what we know is that this is just the beginning. This is the playbook that they're going to run. And if the Trump administration gets away with this with USAID, they're going to move it on to the Department of Education. They're going to move it on to FEMA and other aspects of this. And we have to show that this is illegal. This is not an action that the executive can do on their own, and that this is something that the American people deserve greater clarity. I just had a one-on-one meeting with the nominee for Department of Education, Linda McMahon, and she told me that there are going to be very significant cuts of staff at Department of Education, transfer of staff to other departments. This is their plan.
I know that the battles are playing out in the court. They are also playing out in protests and rallies. Senator Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, held a news conference that was a lot like a rally outside of the Treasury Department to counter some of the actions by Elon Musk. Take a look.
I am going to stand with you in this fight, and we will win. We will win. We will win. We will win.
Are you satisfied with how your party is pushing back in this moment? Have Democrats found their footing?
Well, I want to make sure that the American people see it across the board in terms of all the different prongs of what's happening. There is the litigation side, legislation, the oversight, the communication, and I'll also add the mobilization that you saw there. When it comes to litigation, what we've seen so far, dozens of lawsuits. This is something that the senators, we had been in touch with the state's attorney general ever since November, talking about what comes next. And you see so far, right now, the state's attorney generals are 3 for 3 in terms of being able to move that forward. Now we're also proceeding with the legislation side. We have the continuing resolution. Basically, in a few weeks, the Republicans are going to try to figure out how they move forward. And they have, for the last 2 years, needed Democratic votes for every single continuing resolution, and they should not count on that this time around.
Okay, you take me to my next question, because your colleague Jeff Merkley basically said he's prepared to try to shut down the government over some of these sledgehammer actions that he's seeing by Elon Musk. Are you prepared to shut down the government, to join Democratic colleagues who want to stand in the way of keeping the government open?
Well, you have to look at what the Trump administration is doing right now. They are simply trying to dismantle the government. So yes, look, if we have to take steps to be able to hold them accountable, use the leverage that we have to force it, I cannot support efforts that will continue this lawlessness that we're seeing when it comes to this administration's actions. And for us to be able to support government funding in that way, only for them to turn it around to dismantle the government, that is not something that should be allowed.
So just to be clear, Senator, you are open to voting yes to shut down the government, to make this point.
This is on them. This is about whether or not they can get the votes. They are the majority. And if they cannot govern, then that's for the American people to see. But I worked in government. I worked through multiple government shutdowns. I would be the last person to want to get to that stage. But we are at a point where we are basically on the cusp of a constitutional crisis, seeing this administration taking steps that are so clearly illegal. And until we see a change in that behavior, we should not allow and condone that, nor should we assist in that.
Senator, of course, the other big news today is the Super Bowl. I know that you are an Eagles fan, as am I. Of course, the Chiefs have won the last 2 years. What do you think? Do you think the Eagles can pull it off?
Yeah, look, I'm just happy to be alive in the time of Saquon Barkley, that I get to share the planet with such an incredible man. So I just want to see him happy. I think he deserves it. I think the Eagles deserve it. So I can't wait to watch it with my kids.
That's great. Well, I'm glad you get to watch with your kids. Senator, thanks so much for being here. Hope you'll come back real soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, when we come back, the world's richest man is testing the limits of the law and presidential powers as he moves quickly to gut the federal government. The panel is next. Welcome back. The panel is here. NBC News chief Washington correspondent and chief foreign affairs correspondent Andrea Mitchell, who on Friday marked the end of her show. Andrea Mitchell reports after 17 years on the air. NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, Simone Sanders Townsend, former chief spokesperson for Vice President Harris and co-host of The Weekend, and Republican strategist Sarah Fagan. Thanks to all of you for being here. Andrea, we looked it up. You are the panelist who has been on Meet the Press the most in history. 240 appearances marked today. And here's to many, many, many more.
That's so wonderful. This is the show I love so much.
Well, we love having you here, Andrea, and it's thrilled to have you here on a big Sunday. So break this down. I mean, we just talked to the Trump National Security Advisor amid questions about Gaza, whether he plans to try to make Canada the 51st state, and of course, all of these cuts that we're seeing. How do you see the Trump doctrine right now, Andrea?
It appears to the world as might makes right in Gaza, in Panama, Canada. And you can argue that this is an opening bid, but we've seen, for instance, in Panama, where I was last week, that there was an opening bid, we're going to take back the canal, and then they upped it to U.S. Navy ships have to sail for free. The Panamanian president pushing back furiously and saying, eventually saying that China's Belt and Road initiatives, other construction projects he would cancel, but he can't cancel the ports at the canal. And then upping it as well. In Canada, the 51st state issue is, I talk to people in Canada, this is helping the Liberals who were behind the Conservatives in the election to replace Trudeau. So there's a real backlash there. People are taking it seriously. In Gaza, the food aid that was part of the ceasefire deal is being halted. That's a critical part, the surge in food aid. The president has floated the idea of owning Gaza. Within 45 minutes, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi leader, at 4 in the morning issued a statement flatly rejecting that. That is basically would kill what is the plan that the U.S. and Netanyahu have for the Saudis to recognize Israel long term. It's just a no-starter. And so in Gaza as well, this could really hurt, not only the ceasefire deal, but the U.S. aid all over the world. 26 million people were saved by U.S. aid in Africa alone. And those HIV retroviral drugs in Mozambique affect 2 million people. Career diplomats are saying that there are risks of mutation and other real health injuries.
Well, Gabe, I mean, Andrea takes me to you, which is that Elon Musk is behind these massive cuts that we are seeing. And a lot of people are fascinated by the Trump-Musk relationship. How do you see it playing? How would you characterize it right now?
Well, Kristen, I think it's mutually beneficial. Elon Musk has more power than any other richest man in the world has ever had before. And for President Trump, he gets to have somebody that takes the incoming fire. Democrats are now training, their fire on Elon Musk. And I've been speaking with officials at the White House, Kristen, and they say that Musk checks in with Donald Trump several times a day. They have a mutual respect. And Trump really likes the fact that he just doesn't seem to care about the Washington establishment. You remember just a few years ago, he was the guy that used an expletive when he was asked what he would tell advertisers. He just doesn't seem to care about that. Oh, absolutely. And for Donald Trump, the question becomes, how long will this relationship last? In your interview with Mike Waltz, you brought up the idea that, okay, Elon Musk is now looking at the Department of Defense. He has billions of contracts there.
It's a great point, Gabe. And Sarah, let's take a look at the cover of Time magazine. This is so fascinating. Here's a split screen. Here's the cover this week. That's the cover in February during Trump's first year in office, first administration. Steve Bannon appeared on the cover. Not soon afterwards was he out of the administration. Their relationship started to fray. A lot of people think this won't last forever.
Well, first, you have in one man the greatest technologist and entrepreneur of our time, and the other is simply a gadfly. So I think comparing them is not even a fair comparison. I think Musk has some real run room, and the reason is because he's actually doing things and he's making incredible moves to transform the government. I mean, many people would say this is a very needed transformation. We are spending $6 trillion. We are taking in roughly $4 trillion. We have $1 trillion of interest. It's unsustainable. Something has to give. And Trump's sort of force of nature, Musk's force of nature, will, I think, ultimately do a lot of good for the United States long term.
I guess my point is that the biggest line items, you talk about the Department of Defense, if you are really trying to cut the budget a little bit or bring the numbers down, you have to look at the Department of Defense. You would have to take on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, things that the Trump administration, that Donald Trump himself has said he's not going to touch, but Elon Musk just today retweeting a congressman saying, or a senator saying, we got to look at Social Security.
But a lot of what, if you follow Elon on Twitter, I mean, a lot of what he's talking about, and by the way, this is all transparent and open, which we should acknowledge. A lot of it is, you know, they believe very strongly from their initial look that there's 10% of the spend is fraud, waste, and abuse.
But the problem is that USAID is like a half of 1% of the budget. It's low-hanging fruit because people stressed out in America think, well, foreign aid is terrible, so let's get rid of it. But it's so little. That's not deficit reduction. Real deficit reduction is, as you were just saying, it's in the really big programs that take up.
It's not just USAID that they're going to transform. And I agree. USAID does some very important work, and clearly the State Department is going to have to look at that and figure out how to advance the nation's interests. But that doesn't mean that everything they're doing made sense. And so a lot of those cuts are in programs that aren't advancing our interests. And no American should want that.
And, you know, White House officials do say this. And you're talking about low-hanging fruit. Yes, it is low-hanging fruit, but this is how they get the ball rolling. And, you know, back to the point I was making before, Donald Trump really does seem to have, at this point, a mutual respect for Elon Musk because he doesn't see him as a donor. One senior administration official told me.
Russia and China propaganda is in overdrive, and China's moving into these vacuums.
And who is unthrilled here is Congress, because we do still have a system of co-equal branches of government. And I think there's 90 days to make or break a habit. Congress has about... We're well into the 90 days here. Congress needs to assert their authority here before it's too late.
That's why I thought it was so fascinating what Senator Kim was saying, that, yeah, he might move to shut down the government. Even as Republicans, Sarah, try to figure out what their strategy is to get the Trump agenda passed. We just have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, Democrats for 30 years have called for clean debt limit extensions. And so it looks like they're going to abandon that. Republicans have to get this done. They don't have an option.
The real damage could be the CIA buyouts. It takes decades to train CIA agents overseas, and you could lose all of that brain power.
So the idea is there could be a real national security impact as well. Yeah. All right, guys, fantastic conversation. Thank you. When we come back on this Super Bowl Sunday, a look back at a Super Bowl bet that didn't quite work out well for one moderator. Our Meet the Press Minute is next. Welcome back. The Super Bowl is tonight. And for Meet the Press, it's an opportunity to remember Buffalo Bills superfan Tim Russert, who moderated this broadcast for more than 16 years. In 1993, Tim raised the Super Bowl stakes with this friendly wager ahead of the Bills-Cowboys face-off.
Senator Dole, the Super Bowl today.
Oh, yeah.
Who do you like? Who do you like?
I like the Chiefs. But they didn't make it, so my second choice is Dallas.
Dallas?
Dallas.
Senator, would you like to trade an all-expense-paid weekend in Buffalo against an all-expense-paid weekend in Russell, Kansas?
That might be a deal, yeah. Or can I have... Russell would be great for me. Or you go to Russell and I go to Buffalo?
That's the deal.
Oh. Well, if Kemp will go with me, I'll go, yeah.
I'll call you in the morning. Well, about that Super Bowl. One thing about growing up in Buffalo, you know when you get whipped. And boy, did we get whipped. Congratulations to the Super Bowl champion Dallas Cowboys, a great football team. And yes, Senator Dole, I'll be making my pilgrimage to Russell, Kansas. And yes, Treasury Secretary Benson, your bucket of Buffalo chicken wings, they're on their way. Our day will come.
So great to look back on that moment. When we come back, our Meet the Moment conversation with Amanda Gorman on the power of poetry.
Meet the Moment is sponsored by Progressive Insurance. Save when you bundle auto, home, and motorcycle insurance.
Welcome back. Amanda Gorman captured the world's attention when she became the youngest inaugural poet, delivering a powerful message at President Biden's inauguration in 2021 at the age of 22.
We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free.
In the 4 years since, Gorman has become an advocate, speaking out against racial inequality and the banning of books. She is out with a new book, Girls on the Rise, where she speaks to young women about empowerment, inclusivity, and facing their fears. I sat down with Amanda Gorman for a Meet the Moment conversation where we discussed her journey and how poetry can speak to all Americans. Amanda Gorman, welcome to Meet the Press.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
It is an honor to have you here. What do you hope young girls, young boys, young people take away from the message in this new book?
I'm so excited about this children's book because for me, it originated around this idea of having a children's book that underscores the importance of community and allyship. So often in children's books, we follow an individual character, which I love. I live for that. But I was kind of like, what if we turn that on its head a little bit? And the book is about the village. It's about the wave. It's about the movement. It's about what it means to be a young person in a generation that is going to and is currently changing the world. And that's what I hope is the heartbeat of the book.
Why was it important for you to celebrate young women and young girls in this moment?
I love that question because this book has been in the works for several years. I kind of came into being a few years ago when Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was testifying in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I, like so many other people, was just watching that testimony enwrapped. And I think especially as a woman, I really connected with that sensation of being the person in the room, speaking your truth and not being heard. And I wrote that poem that night. And then as the years went on, I started thinking to myself, this could also be a message that I think particularly young girls and their allies need to hear now more than ever.
You have used your art and your poetry for activism. You've spoken out about racial inequality, climate change. You've spoken out about book banning, particularly after your poem that you delivered at the 2021 inauguration was banned in a Florida school. What was your reaction when you learned that your poem had been banned?
To be honest, it was a bit like a gut punch. It felt surreal. I had understood that book bans have been happening, but I think this hit me so incredibly hard because not just that it was something I had written, which is besides the point, that it was a moment in history, that if a child at the school wanted to hear words that were spoken on a presidential inauguration for their country, it had kind of been softly restricted in that way. But I think as I started to kind of open my eyes to the broader environment of what's happening now, there are so many book bans happening right now that are very terrifying if you pay attention to what that means for a children's right to read and learn and what it means for teachers and libraries. There's been reports of over 10,000 book bans just in the school year alone. That's an over 200% increase from last school year. And so I would say if anyone cares beyond just my own work being banned, it's so important to be awake to what's happening on a local level.
When did you know you wanted to be a poet? Did you know, or are you just, is it just a part of you? Is it something you've always known?
I think it is a bit a part of me, almost like in my blood. I felt this kind of will of writing. Even when I was like 4 or 5, my mom would have to give me quarters for every morning I stayed in bed instead of getting up at like 6 a.m. and writing because that poor woman would have to get up with me and turn on the lights. And so even then I was writing as if I was a commissioned poet. I didn't know that writing was a job at that point. I didn't know that it was something that I could do, let alone as a girl, let alone as a Black person. But as I grew and saw examples of that, I knew I would give my whole life to just have this as my craft.
Why do you think poetry is so critical to who we are as a nation?
Poetry has consistently been the language of a people. I think it's the reason why when there's protest, you will hear metaphor, you will hear they buried us, but they didn't know we were seeds. It's the reason that there's a poem and not a 36-page essay at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. When we are trying as a people to speak to our best shared common humanity, typically poetry is the rhetoric that encapsulates that the best. I think there's something magical about it that is humble, that is hopeful, but that's also wounded enough to remind us of the past that we've stepped from and the future we want to move to.
I'm usually interviewing politicians who don't want to say that they want to run for this office or that office or run for president one day. You have proudly and confidently said that you want to run for president in 2036 when you are able to do that. When did you first get that bug? When did you first think, I want to be president of the United States one day?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think I was probably 11, sixth grade, very early. I have delusions of grandeur, as you would say. But at that age, I was just starting to become an activist, and I was getting interested in local issues. Particularly, I had a friend whose mother was doing work around sex trafficking, and I was finding out about that. And I was just overwhelmed with the amount of policy that was not in place. And I started thinking to myself, someone has to do something about these issues. Then I kind of looked around and I said, why not me? Why not now? Why not here? And so I think from a young age, it just felt like a responsibility and an opportunity to step up.
And Amanda, poets are a part of the history of this country, from Robert Frost to Maya Angelou.
Yes.
What do you hope your mark will be?
I hope my mark is being a wordsmith and a change maker who speaks in a language that allows our country to return to love, legacy, and connection.
Our thanks to Amanda Gorman for a great conversation. And to see my full interview with Amanda Gorman, go to meetthepress.com. That is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the Super Bowl. Go Birds. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.